Welcome back, everyone, to our last segment of Pollinator Live, a distance learning adventure. We have all of our experts back here with us today, and we're going to talk about what you can do to help pollinators. My name is Tamberly Conway, and I work for the U.S. Forest Service, and I'll be your host for this portion of the program. We're also going to check in with all the students that went out on the bee hunt, and we'll answer your questions about the bee hunt. So don't forget to buzz in and email those to the address on your screen. Now, the best thing that we can do for pollinators is to establish or maintain a garden. So if you don't have a garden at your school or in your community and you want to improve your own, you can go to PollinatorLIVE because we're offering $500 schoolyard and community garden grants. So you can help pollinators too. For more information about those grants, go to the web address on your screen. Now, here are some pollinator-friendly practices that you can do. First, we can provide foraging habitat, or that's actually a place that pollinators search for and eat food. Next, we can provide habitat for reproduction and also for shelter. Also, we can limit the use of pesticides in our gardens. We can also monitor for pollinators like what we're doing with Bee Hunt. And then finally, we can plant natives, our plants that are local to your area. So now we're going to talk about each point. And first, we have Miss Donna with us. And so, Miss Donna, can you tell us about how we can improve habitat for foraging?
Right. Well, forage is material that pollinators gather for food or nesting material. So when you plant your beautiful gardens, just remember to consider which pollinators might be there for foraging for food. Sometimes they might have different mouth parts or come in different sizes and attracted to flowers for different reasons. But if you plant a variety of flowers in your garden, you'll help them out a lot. Now, when you plant, remember to provide continuous blooms that last throughout the growing season. Some flowers only last for a short amount of time and some last for a very long time. But if you can plant some that will last in spring, summer, and some stay present until the fall, that will help the pollinators as well. Try to plant larger areas of the same species of plant together because pollinators can find them better. If you plant big areas of red or big areas with really fragrant flowers, they'll be able to home in on it and visit more often. And last, remember to plant native plants that are specific to the area that you live in. Native plants encourage native pollinators. They are 4 times more likely to visit native plants than other pollinators would. So encouraging pollinators of all types and native pollinators is always a good thing.
Thank you, Ms. Donna. We appreciate that. And there's some great ideas to help improve that habitat for foraging. And now, Mr. Allen, what can you tell us about providing habitat for reproduction?
Well, you have to think about the fact that animals need food, water, shelter, and a way to reproduce. Your backyard, your schoolyard, that is the habitat. You have to think about the temperature, the shade, the animals, and where the animals are breeding. For bumblebees, some of the solitary bees, they need to burrow down in the soil, so don't use quite as much mulch. There needs to be leaf litter, so instead of removing all the leaves, maybe move them to the edges of the yard so that there are places for beetles to reproduce there. And as we've talked about before, if you have monarchs, you need to plant the plants, the milkweed, for them to be able to have a host plant and be able to lay their eggs and have the caterpillars eat. So all of these things you have to consider when you think about the habitat, and you might even be able to build a box that the solitary bees can breed in, which Nate will tell you about as well and give you an example. So get a full picture of what the habitat is, get a full picture of what the temperature, the rainfall, and that's how you define the habitat and how you keep your yard.
Thank you so much, Mr. Allen. Appreciate that. And now, Nate, can you tell us how we might be able to provide habitat for shelter?
Sure. Just as you can build bird boxes, you can also build bee boxes. And here's a good example. This is basically just a block of wood that you drill holes into, and holes of different sizes. So you can take different drill bits and make larger or smaller holes. And it's fairly deep, so the solitary bees can go in and make little cells and continue their reproductive cycle. So this is one way, and you'd have to clean these out each year. But another way is you can actually you can use straw tubes. And here I have basically a tin can, and there are tubes that you actually are commercially available that you can purchase. And here you go. Sean will hold these. You can see there are some ends of the tubes that are actually covered in mud. Those are full of bees that will emerge next spring, so a whole year from now. And this is just an individual tube that I've taken out, and this is unoccupied, but I can actually, well, I should be able to, there we go. I can actually pull out that straw tube, so next year I can insert in a new tube after those have emerged and reuse all of this, because you just don't want to have the same tube. Again, you want to clean out those tubes. So these are two artificial ways of increasing shelters and habitats in your garden.
Thank you. Yes, everybody needs a home, and so those are some great ideas to be able to do that. And how about you, Sean? Can you tell us about pesticide use and maybe limiting that?
Sure, Tamberly. First of all, children should never handle pesticides because they can be very dangerous substances. So only adults should use pesticides if they're really necessary, and often they're not. We should limit our use of pesticides as much as possible. This is because the main problem with pesticides is they don't just kill the insects that are doing damage to our gardens, but they also kill a lot of beneficial insects in our gardens as well. So they kill the good with the bad. So we need to remember some very important things whenever we think about using pesticides. The first is that, do we really need to use them in the first place? The second is, if we have to use them, we should use them in as limited area as possible. And the third thing is, if we're using them, we should make sure that we're using them properly according to the directions. Now, one thing that people don't often realize is that some insects act as better pest management agents than pesticides. There are insects such as ladybugs, which will eat things like aphids that are on your plants. Other insects such as praying mantises will eat a wide variety of insects that cause damage to your plants.
Thank you so much, Sean. Appreciate that. Now, our next question is about monitoring, and you talked a lot about Discover Life, Dr. Pick. So can you tell us how we can help pollinators through monitoring, why it's important?
I don't know. Why do you think it's important? I'm messing with it, Emily.
I know.
I had to get you there. I would like to throw this out to you. Why do you think it's important that we monitor nature? Why would you want to go out there into your schoolyard and look at not only the bees and the plants so we can understand that, but also the lichens, which are very good indicators of air pollution and so on. So as scientists, what we're trying to do is go out there, collect the data that we need so we can better understand the system and get excited about it so we want to protect it. I mean, these creatures are providing what we call ecosystem services. They're cleaning the environment, they're pollinating it, they're providing food for us. We need to help them and understand them, and that's why we monitor. And I hope you guys will all get involved. Ask these questions. How would you monitor your schoolyard? What information would you want in that schoolyard or your local park? How could you get involved?
Well, I think one thing that our audience might be able to do is buzz in with some of that information, so maybe we can see what you want to learn.
Yeah, what do you guys want to learn about nature around you?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Pick.
Sorry to tease you.
Oh, I love it. All right, and our next question is for Dr. Chip Taylor. And the last recommendation is to plant natives, or species that are local to your area. So why is that so important, Dr. Taylor?
Well, it's important to plant natives because the insects, you're going to hold this for me? Thank you very much. The insects that we're trying to promote use these native plants. And here I'm holding two milkweed plants. I'm holding what is known as a butterfly weed right here on my left, and I'm holding something that's called swamp milkweed here on my right. Both of these are good native plants for monarch butterflies. They come and they lay eggs on these plants. The larvae complete their development, and this contributes to the monarch population. But we're also interested in planting native nectar plants, all right? Seeking out a lot of native nectar plants that could be added to these gardens so that the butterflies can have the native nectar sources that they need. And what we're trying to do is encourage a large-scale restoration of a lot of landscapes through the migration route of the monarchs through the central portion of the country, particularly along roadsides, so that we can increase the amount of native vegetation out there that can be used for all the pollinators, by all the pollinators, and by monarch butterflies.
Great, so we can all do our part,
Right.
helping pollinators. All right, and so now we're looking also at monarch way stations, and how are those important?
Well, let me just tell you about Monarch Way Stations. It's a program we started about 5 years ago, and this program we encourage people to try to create habitats for monarch butterflies because we're losing so much habitat each year, each day in this country. You know, it adds up. 2.2 million acres a year is what we're losing just due to development. That's an awful lot of habitat. In the length of time I've been running Monarch Watch, we have lost an area in this country that's 3 times the size of the state of Illinois. That's a lot of habitat to lose for our native wildlife. And so we want to do everything we can to compensate for that and get a lot of people involved to create these habitats in schoolyards, in nature centers, in their own private properties, wherever they might be, and all the natural sites that are under the control of states and federal agencies. We're really thinking big here. We need to do this. It's big time, it's important.
So-
Over 90 years?
So we can,
I've got to live a long time, all right? I'm going to see this through.
so yes, we can all do our part, work locally, and then up into the different agencies and organizations. So we can all work together as partners. So we're pollinator partners too. All right. And also, it's very important that, you know, we provide these gardens so we can provide gardens in our schoolyards, our own backyards, window boxes even if you don't have a backyard. And if you want to find out more information about pollinators, you can always go to the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign at the web address that's on your screen. And what you do is you enter your zip code and you can get information about your specific ecoregion. So don't forget also about those garden grants that we discussed earlier in the program, because you can apply for those and potentially get one of those grants so you can plant a schoolyard garden or a community garden. And so now we also have our students that are back from the bee hunt. And how was your bee hunt adventure, your safari?
It was great. We saw a lot of, great pollinators out there, and we followed all like the protocol, like we took pictures of the GPS and our location so that we can, inform the people who run pollinators about, where we were and how, the pollinators are affected in that area. So
I'm sure this is going to be a really great benefit for Discover Life. They're going to be able to use all of your information, and that's going to be excellent.
We
So
very
hope
much appreciate it. Great.
Yes,
Yes,
Dr.
very
Cook.
good. Very appreciate the enthusiasm and your efforts, and hope you'll continue doing this throughout the year and throughout your life.
All right. So do you feel like a real scientist now?
Yes, I definitely do.
Excellent.
Should we show some pictures?
Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and
All
see
right.
some things.
So you have
that,
some photos. She can
Here,
start
would you
out
like
with
to take-
hers.
all right.
Here you go.
Okay, so the first image here is our GPS, which gives us our location, and then we took a photograph of our cell phone, which tells us exactly when we took our pictures. And then we took a photograph of all the people that were on the bee hunt. And I'll skip through the north, south, east, and west photos and go straight to some of the pollinators that we saw. Here's a little bee. We don't know the names of a lot of these bees, but our partners can tell us what the names are. This is a weevil that we found on one of the purple flowers, and a little green bee. And here's a hoverfly. And this is one of the interesting things about taking photographs out in the field. I would not have seen this little drama play out if I hadn't had a camera in my hand. This little hoverfly was about 5 times smaller than the carpenter bee, and it was banging into the carpenter bee and sort of claiming its territory in these purple sage flowers and sort of saying, no, you go somewhere else and get your pollen. I'm taking over these flowers here. And it was a really interesting drama that was playing out. And here's another little thing that I found that's not a pollinator, that was just on a plant, a pretty little hopper, and another bee. And here's, I think these are yours, Alex.
Yeah, again, we don't know what kind of bee this is, but it's a cute little bumblebee or bee. This is a bumblebee, big, cute little one. This is also another bee. And this is a photo that Garrison took of me.
And another bee.
Yeah, we had this huge annoying bee that was following us around the entire time, and it got kind of annoying, to be honest. But
Well, we really thank y'all so much for going out on the bee hunt and contributing all of this incredible data to Discover Life. It's really important. And also now we're going to get a little summary about what we learned today. And we're going to take some final questions as well. So remember to keep buzzing in, and we can still receive some of those at the email address on your screen. So to summarize what we've learned, especially if you didn't get to join us for all of the segments, first we learned about what a pollinator is and how pollination works. And next, we learned why pollination is so important to all of us and also to wildlife. And next we learned about how to become a citizen scientist by going on a bee hunt, looking at Discover Life, all of these wonderful ways to become a scientist. And then we received an update on monarch butterflies. And through Monarch Watch, we can learn more. And then finally, we learned how to attract pollinators and to help them, you at home, in your schools, in your communities. And so all of these programs will be up very soon at the web address on your screen, so you can go in later and watch the programs at your convenience. Now, if you can't watch today, or if you couldn't watch, go back in later. Now, continue to buzz in and send in your questions. And so we're going to do a little question and answer period. And we have some questions that we're going to answer from our audience out there. Now, the first question is from Wild Homeschool Group in Portsmouth, Virginia. Now, let's see. I know who needs this question. Why was bread not included in the pollinator group of foods we just saw in the first program? And doesn't wheat have to be pollinated?
Wheat does have to be pollinated. If you remember, as Donna talked, there are ways to pollinate by wind, which wheat is wind pollinated. And we're concerned about the pollinators, and that is what we're focused on. But without pollinators, you can still have bread.
Thank you, Alan. Next question, please. Thank you, Gabrielle the Butterfly. Our next question is from the Montessori School of Navarre in Florida. And this question is, when are the best months to plant a pollinator garden? You can raise your hands. The best months for a pollinator garden, Nate?
Well, I usually start in the fall. A lot of times I'll amend the soil. I live in Virginia and I have lots of Virginia clay, so I want to put a lot of humus and mulch and manure in there and maybe some sand to loosen it up. And so it's all ready, so in early spring I can start planting plants. But it's not too early to start planting some plants in the early fall. So spring and fall are good. The dead of summer is not the best time because plants are really under stress with a lot of heat from the sun.
Okay, great. So you're kind of always working on that garden.
Yes.
All right. Next question, please. Thank you, Gabrielle. All right, our next question is from Ms. Rizwan's 7th grade class from McMillan Junior High in Wiley, Texas. So, how did monarchs get their name?
Monarchs get their name from King Billy. When the first settlers came here, William of Orange was known as King Billy. And the settlers saw this big orange butterfly and they decided to call it King Billy, or the monarch. That's how the monarch got its name.
Very interesting.
Very good.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
We didn't know that.
No, I know. See, we're all learning. All of us are learning. Great. King Chip. All right, our next question is from Mrs. Gau's class at Mountain View Elementary in Haymarket, Virginia. So, do bees see in black and white? And if so, how would the petals attract them if they can't see the beautiful colors?
So actually bees can see in color, but they see in color a slightly different way than we do as human beings. Bees see colors in terms of ultraviolet light. So a flower that is orange or blue to us will actually look a little different and actually will kind of seem more bright to a bee than it does to us.
Thank you. Yes,
If I
please.
can just interject there, there's some absolutely fascinating experiments that Carl von Frisch, who got a Nobel Prize for animal behavior, did with bees and color. And you can reward bees on one color, and then you can switch it and see how they all fly in and so on. And it's the type of experiment you could do to train bees to one color and then move the reward over and so on. And it's a very, very elegant little book that he wrote on this. It's great.
That's interesting. I would never have thought that you could train bees.
You can train
That's
them.
great.
It's smart.
All right, thank you. Our next question comes from Mrs. Hart's class at St. Joseph's School in Ole, Illinois. How do bats get to the pollen in small plants, and how are they attracted since they are blind?
You're bats.
I'm batty, okay. No, bat flowers are very special flowers. Most of them are white. Most of them have a very open flower. Most of them have a lot of pollen that they present. And the bats do not gather the pollen, but rather the pollen is brushed all over their faces by all of these anthers that are in the flower. And so the bat comes in and sticks its nose in to get the nectar, gets the pollen all over its face, and it goes to another flower. But of course the bat's licking itself all the time, and therefore it gets a little nutrient out of this pollen, but it doesn't actually collect pollen or use pollen. It's mostly the flower design that gets the pollen from place to place on the face of the bats. Now, bats generally do not visit flowers that are not bat adapted. So they don't visit these little small things, which I think was what the question was all about. They visit really special flowers that are designed for bats. It's a coevolution. It's an evolution of the flower and an evolution of the flower feeding bats.
Excellent. I love that. All right. Now, let's have another one. You get to go batty. All right. All right. And this is from the students at Passbar Homeschool in Arlington, Texas. Is there a color variation between male and female butterflies? Butterflies. Dr.
Very
Pick?
much depends on the species. We have some butterflies we call sexually dimorphic, where the males and the females will be quite different. A lot of the blues, the males are blue and the females are brown. Other species, it's very difficult to tell them apart. They'll look virtually identical. If a brilliant expert would like to add to that?
One of the things that I did early in my career is I worked on the sulfur butterflies. Everybody knows the sulfur butterflies, those little yellow, kind of lemon yellow butterflies that fly around alfalfa fields. Well, there are two species of them. And one of the species is all yellow, and the other species is orange. And the orange species has males that have a UV reflectance pattern. It reflects UV, but we can't see that. The female butterflies can, and it's very important in mating for the female butterfly to see the UV reflectance pattern, the flash of the male butterfly as he's approaching. If the wrong butterfly approaches, doesn't have that flash, no dice.
No luck.
So males always have to be flashing. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. And this is from our third grade class at Christ the King Catholic School in Chicago. This is from Ms. Sullivan and Ms. Foreman's classes. Which states in the U.S. have the greatest need for pollinators?
Probably California, wouldn't you think?
So California has almond crops, and once every year, almost all of the honeybee colonies from all over the country go to California to help pollinate almond crops. So California has a very kind of special need, and it's very important agriculturally in general. But all states grow agriculture, and all states have wildflowers that need to be pollinated. So really all of them.
Right.
Thank you. Gabriel? Thank you very much. Go Texas. Mrs. Howard's class from Armstrong Elementary in Sashi, Texas wants to know, what are some of the good plants to put in your schoolyard garden to attract pollinators? Nate?
One of my favorites, and I'll pass the microphone around and everyone can, I think, list their favorites,
That's a good idea.
are mints. One of the mints I put in my garden last year is Pycnanthemum muticum. It's a mountain mint, and it's actually, it blooms for a very long time, as Donna was saying is important, and there were just many species of bees all over it all summer. So anyone else want to pick their favorite plant?
I like asters, but it's mainly because I have a beautiful painting of an aster and a bee hanging in my living room, but they're still important flowers.
I like sunflowers and Joe Pyeweed, but it's just my preference.
I would go with goldenrods. In the fall, they are the trap. They're a natural trap of everything that's been out there building up their populations, they come to goldenrods at the end of the season, and if you've got a goldenrod patch next to you, they're usually weeds along roadsides or abandoned lots. They are absolutely fantastic place, so I plant goldenrods.
Well, I got two. I got like two. New England aster. New England aster has a big mound like this, and it can be covered, a big plant can be covered with 20 or 30 butterflies on it and a lot of bees and a lot of soldier beetles. But another one I like is something called ageratum, a kind of a blue mist ageratum. And we had a patch, maybe about a meter square, in our Monarch Way Station #1 at the University of Kansas, which was a real attractive plant. And it had about 300 different pollinators per square meter when that thing was in full bloom. I mean, it had at least a dozen species of small solitary bees, plus a lot of butterflies. And of course, those soldier beetles, they're everywhere.
Very little else to do in Kansas.
And this kind of relates back to the image that we saw earlier about goldenrods when we were looking at the bee hunt. If we looked in that one little tiny patch, how many pollinators do we see just in that one area? So it does depend on what you plant as to what you're going to attract. We have time for one more question, and this is from Ms. Harris's class in Nixa, Missouri. Why do you use soapy water, and is it harmful to the bees? Ow.
So we use soapy water, first of all, because it's non-toxic and it's very easy to get soap and water. The soap will actually prevent the bees from crawling out of the bowl. And so when we sample bees, the bees do, unfortunately, will die in the bowl so that we can observe them and study them closer.
Thank you, Sean. And one last question from Conley Elementary in Las Cruces, New Mexico. How do you attract ladybugs to your garden?
I encourage my aphids. I know that's counterintuitive, but I make sure that the aphids stay on my milkweeds, Chip. And once the aphids are there, then the ladybugs come in. But if anybody has any other ideas, I'll pass it on.
Any other ideas out there?
There's certain plants, particularly in the pea family, are very good for growing pea aphids and other aphids and so on. So vetch and peas and so on tend to get a lot of ladybugs on because they're feeding on the aphids again.
Thank you, Dr. Pick.
Don't let them eat those monarch caterpillars. We don't want them to do that.
No, we don't.
Some of the more recent introductions are eating native ladybugs.
All right. Thank you, all of our experts. We really appreciate you answering all these questions today, and that's all the time we have for today. So we thank all of the scientists and experts that are here, all of the students, also the bee and the butterfly. Yeah. All right. And we also thank our webcast audience out there for joining us today on this great virtual field trip. Remember, don't forget about those garden grants. You can go to the web address on your screen and learn more about how you can apply for a Pollinator Live grant. Also, teachers, educators, and adults that are watching this program now, please go to the web address on your screen and fill out that online evaluation because your feedback is extremely important to us. This will help us improve our programs. And also, you can fill out one of these and receive a beautiful pollinator poster. And also, we'll plant one milkweed plant for each survey that we receive back. And we'll plant those plants in one of our local schools here in Washington, D.C., or one of our USDA People's Gardens. We'll also enter your name in to win some great prizes from the U.S. Forest Service. We'll select 10 individuals randomly, and you'll receive a packet of wonderful materials about pollinators, also woodsy owl and smoky bear materials that you can use in your classroom. And that will be for a total of 30 students. So you can use it in your classroom or in your communities. And lastly, we thank the National Zoo for hosting us here today for Pollinator Live. As well, we truly thank all of our sponsors and for all of the incredible support from everyone out there. Now, we're going to have another webcast in September, so we hope to see you then. And we thank you for joining us here from the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. for the Insect Zoo in your schoolyard. This is Tamberly buzzing out for Pollinator Live. Everybody, come on in. Come right, Pollinator Live!